Have you ever wondered how a single act of kindness, something as simple as letting a stranger warm up in your truck, could change everything? This is a quiet story of a lonely mechanic, a woman with a hidden past and a small act of humanity that turned into something far greater than either of them could imagine. It's not flashy, it's not loud, but it might just stay with you long after the last word. If you enjoy meaningful stories about second chances, quiet healing, and the kind of goodness the world needs more of, consider subscribing. We share true-to-the-heart stories just like this one, stories that warm your soul, one chapter at a time. Now get comfortable, because this one starts on a snowy night with an old truck and a woman shivering in the dark. A poor mechanic let a shivering woman warm up in his truck. She left behind a card that changed everything. The engine made a soft clicking sound when Tom turned the key, a familiar stutter followed by a reluctant rumble. The old Chevy truck had been with him for nearly 20 years, and on mornings like this, cold, still and grey, it always needed a little extra coaxing, like an old friend grumbling about getting out of bed. Tom didn't mind. There was comfort in the routine. Tap the gas twice, turn the key just right, give it a moment, and then ease it into gear. In the world that had shifted beneath his feet too many times, there was something sacred in things that still worked the way they were supposed to. The shop was quiet, save for the creaking of the roof and the occasional hiss from the old space. Heater in the corner. A framed photograph sat dusty on the counter, tucked behind a jar of loose screws. His wife, Marianne, and their son, Caleb, frozen in a sunlit moment from a summer long gone. Tom glanced at it without really looking. He did that a lot. Outside, the small town of Willow Creek was still waking up. The sun hadn't broken through the clouds, and the snow from the night before had settled over everything like a hush. Businesses opened slowly in this kind of weather. People stayed inside, roads were slick, and the air carried that heavy stillness that only came right before a storm or right after a heartbreak. Tom stood at the open garage door, coffee steaming in a chipped thermos, watching the world not move. The town had changed. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe he had. Since Marianne passed, everything had lost its color. The laughter, the bustle, even the frustration of work. It all felt like it was happening to someone else. Tom was there, of course. He fixed cars, changed. Oil, gave discounts he couldn't afford. He made small talk with customers and helped old ladies carry their groceries to the car. People liked Tom, said he was a good man. But after the shop closed each evening, when the lights went off and the heater wound down to silence, Tom would sit in his little office with a can of soup and a spoon, eating in the dim orange glow of a desk lamp. There was no one to cook for, no one to come home to. Caleb called once a month, maybe. He'd moved out to Boise for a job at some tech company. Smart kid. His mother's brain, Tom always said. But the distance between them had grown like rust. Quiet, creeping, and hard to fix once it set in. Tom never asked for more. He figured Caleb had his own life. He took a sip of coffee and ran a calloused hand over his beard. Time to get to work, but there were no cars that morning. No appointments, no walk-ins, not even a tow truck hauling in a broken-down sedan. Just the wind rattling the shop sign and the snow gathering like secrets on the windowsills. Tom didn't mind being alone. Not really, but some days the silence was heavier than others. He grabbed a wrench and started tinkering with the heater in the waiting room, more to stay busy than anything else. Halfway through, the old radio on the shelf crackled to life. He'd forgotten it was plugged in. A Johnny Cash song came through, soft and low. Tom paused, listening. Marianne used to hum this one when she cooked Sunday breakfast. He turned the volume up just a little. Later, when he stepped outside again to check the salt levels near the walkway, a memory tugged at him like a draft through a cracked window. He remembered Marianne standing in the snow, wrapped in that red coat he'd bought her for their 10th anniversary. She used to love winter, said it made the world honest. No place to hide when everything's bare. Tom didn't love it. He never had. Still, every year when the first snow fell, he'd find himself looking out at the road, wondering who might need help. It was a habit, maybe a hope. He salted the path, fixed the door hinge, restocked the coffee pot, doing what needed to be done without thinking too hard about why. As the afternoon light began to dim, Tom pulled out his ledger book, the old-school kind, and flipped through the sparse entries of the past week. Business was slower than usual. December was always tough. People postponed repairs until after the holidays. He'd made just enough to cover rent on the shop, but not heat for both the shop and his trailer. He'd sleep in the office tonight. Again. The heater coughed and sputtered. Tom smacked it gently with his palm and muttered under his breath, "Don't. You quit on me now." It groaned but kept going. He sat down, pulled out a tin of soup from the drawer, and unscrewed the lid. A spoon, a napkin, and that was dinner. He turned off the main lights, leaving the desk lamp glowing, and leaned back in the chair. His eyes drifted to the photo again. "I miss you," he whispered. It wasn't the first time he'd said it. Wouldn't be the last. Just then, something outside caught his eye. A shadow, maybe. A flicker of movement near the far side of the parking lot, where the snow piled deeper and the light didn't quite reach. He stood slowly, walked to the door, and squinted through the fogged glass. Nothing. Or maybe someone? He rubbed the window, clean, and looked again. There, near the edge of the lot, was a figure, small, huddled, barely moving. A woman, he thought, sitting on the bench near the old bus stop that hadn't seen a route in 3 years. No coat, no bag, just curled up against the cold like a fallen bird. Tom didn't hesitate. He grabbed his keys and jacket, shoved his arms through the sleeves, and headed for the truck. The engine clicked, coughed, then caught. He turned the heat all the way up and pulled toward the bench slowly. The figure didn't move. He stopped her. Few feet away, rolled down the window. "Ma'am?" he called gently. "You all right?" She looked up. Her eyes were wide and dazed, lips blue. "You need somewhere warm?" She didn't speak, just nodded. Tom reached across and opened the passenger door. "Hop in. Truck's old, but the heater still works." She climbed in, shivering violently. He handed her the coffee thermos without a word. No introductions, no questions, just warmth and silence. And for the first time in a long, long while, Tom felt like maybe the silence wasn't so empty after all. The office smelled faintly of motor oil and instant coffee, the kind of smell that settles into the walls and clings to flannel shirts, no matter how many times you wash them. Tom didn't mind. It smelled like work, like the life he'd built, even if it wasn't the one he'd dreamed of. He stood near the small microwave, watching a can of chicken noodle soup spin slowly on a cracked plate. The wind howled faintly outside, brushing against the aluminum siding of the shop, making the whole structure creak in protest. From the other side of the room came the soft hum of the truck's engine, idling just outside the shop's front door. The woman was still inside, curled up in the passenger seat under the old army blanket Tom had given her. She hadn't said much, just a whisper of "thank you," and then silence. Tom wasn't expecting more. He stirred the soup when the microwave beeped, poured it into a ceramic mug with a chipped handle, and sat down at his old wooden desk. The desk lamp cast a warm yellow circle over the open ledger book, the ink from his last entry still drying. "Brake job, $85, no charge for labor." He took a sip of the soup, lukewarm, salty, but it filled the empty space in his stomach. The way routine filled the spaces in his days. He looked around the office, at the clutter of years. A calendar from 2017 still hanging on the wall because Marianne had liked the photo of the lake in July, a cracked mug full of pens that didn't work, a coffee tin filled with spare keys from cars long since sold or scrapped. Tom had once imagined growing old somewhere else, maybe with a little house on a hill, a porch swing, grandkids underfoot. But life had a way of rewriting your dreams. In quieter, lonelier fonts, he glanced again at the photo frame, tucked into the bookshelf's corner. Marianne, in a blue summer dress, smiling with her hand on Caleb's shoulder. Caleb had been, what, 16 then? He'd just finished rebuilding. His first motorcycle with Tom that summer. A proud moment. They used to have Sunday dinners together back then. Marianne would bake something from scratch, usually with too much cinnamon, and Tom would set the table, humming along to her favorite records. Caleb would complain, but always eat 3 servings. Those dinners were long gone now. Marianne had fought bravely, but lost. And after the funeral, Caleb stayed for 2 weeks before packing up for Boise. He said he needed space. Tom hadn't argued. He understood grief came in different forms. But silence. Silence had become the form grief chose for Tom. The radio on. The desk crackled softly. He turned the volume up a bit. A Willie Nelson song floated through, warm, twangy, nostalgic. Tom sat back, mug in hand, listening as the snow tapped gently against the window. He thought of the woman in the truck, young, mid-30s maybe, pale and thin, like life had worn her edges down. No ring on her finger, no backpack or suitcase, just a worn coat and eyes that had seen too much. He wondered where she had been, headed, or where she was coming from, but he didn't ask. He never did, really, not since Marianne. Questions felt like violations now. People carried enough weight without having to explain it to strangers. He stepped out into the cold again, pulling his coat tighter. The snow had picked up, flurries now dancing sideways in the wind. He opened the passenger door gently. She was awake, eyes half-lidded, still clutching the thermos he'd given her. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse. "Just tired. Thank you. You're welcome to stay in here as long as you need. The heater's stubborn, but it works better than mine." She gave a small, tired smile, and, for a brief second, Tom saw something there, not fear, not even sadness, but a strange kind of recognition, like she knew this kind of night all too well. He hesitated before speaking again. "There's soup inside, if you're hungry." She shook her head. "I'm fine, really. Just need a little warmth." Tom nodded. "All right, I'll be right inside if you need anything." He closed the door gently and returned to his office. Inside, he turned down the radio and dimmed the lamp. The soup had gone cold. He didn't bother finishing it. Instead, he wrapped himself in an old flannel blanket and lay down on the cot, tucked between the filing cabinets and the back wall. It wasn't comfortable, but it beat sleeping in the trailer without heat. He stared at the ceiling, eyes adjusting to the dim. The wind picked up again, howling against the door like a lonely ghost. For a while, he just listened. Then, somewhere between a blink and a breath, he remembered something Marianne used to say. On cold nights, sometimes all a person needs is one warm place to remember the world isn't all bad. He turned on his side, pulled the blanket tighter, and closed his eyes. Outside, in the truck, a stranger slept. And inside, for the first time in a long time, Tom didn't feel entirely alone. By mid-morning, the snow had stopped, but it left behind a world smoothed over and muted, like someone had laid a thick white quilt over the town and told it to rest. Tom stood at the edge of the garage's front lot, boots crunching through, fresh powder watching his breath cloud the air. The truck sat parked exactly where he'd left it. The woman was gone. She'd left sometime before dawn, it seemed. The blanket was neatly folded on the passenger seat, the thermos empty and resting upright in the cup holder. Tom stood for a long moment, his hand resting on the open door, looking at the impression her body had left in the worn vinyl seat. No note, no name, no goodbye, but then he saw it, tucked carefully under the edge of the dashboard, a small cream-colored card. He reached in and picked it up. Heavy stock. No logo or design on the front, just clean and plain. Inside, a few lines written in elegant, slanted handwriting. "Thank you for your kindness. My name is Claire Maddox. If you ever find yourself in need, call me. I won't forget this." A phone number followed. Tom read the note twice, and then again. Maddox. That name rang faintly in the back of his mind, like a bell from a church he hadn't entered in years. He slipped the card into his jacket pocket without thinking too hard about it. People came and went in this world. Some left a mess. Others, like her, left questions. Back inside the shop, he flicked on the lights and started his morning like always. Radio humming softly, coffee brewing, tools laid out neatly on the workbench. But there was a shift in the rhythm today. A hum beneath the surface. Tom didn't know why her leaving felt heavier than her staying. By noon, the roads had cleared enough for a few regulars to come by. First was Mr. Lyle, whose old Buick refused to start every time it dipped below freezing. Then Doris came in, worried that her brake pedal felt mushier than usual. Tom gave her a ride home while he checked it out. It was on that ride, driving Doris down Maple Street, that the memory struck him. Claire Maddox. He remembered now. There'd been an article in the local paper maybe a year ago. A woman named Claire Maddox had started some kind of foundation, helping women re-enter the workforce, supporting transitional housing, building vocational programs in rural areas. She was young, smart, and, if the article was to be believed, wealthy. An entrepreneur who'd built a baking empire out of her grandma's old cinnamon roll recipe, then sold it and poured the profits into community work. Tom pulled over and parked in front of Doris's house, heart thudding strangely. Could it be the same woman? The one who'd slept in his truck, hair tangled, hands trembling from the cold? It didn't make sense. People like that didn't end up alone on a bench in the middle of a snowstorm. Did they? That afternoon, Tom returned to the garage, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat with the card again, turned it over in his hands, read the note like it might change meaning if he stared long enough. He didn't call, didn't even consider it seriously. What would he say? That he gave someone a place to warm up for the night and now needed what exactly? He wasn't a man who asked for help. Hadn't been for years. Instead, he returned to the rhythm of his life, replaced brake pads, adjusted carburetors, cleaned the floor in long, careful lines. But something had shifted. A few days later, as he drove home along the ridge road, he spotted a car pulled off on the shoulder. Hood up, hazard lights blinking. Tom slowed instinctively. Even before Marianne, even before the years weighed on him like an old coat, he'd always stopped. That was just who he was, the kind of man who carried jumper cables in every vehicle and checked on stranded strangers, even if all he could offer was a phone to borrow or a spare bottle of water. He pulled up behind the broken-down car and climbed out. The driver was an older man, maybe mid-60s, with a face red from the cold and hands that shook slightly as he fumbled with the hood latch. "Need a hand?" Tom asked. The man looked up, grateful. "Wouldn't say no. Damn thing just died on me. I don't even know where to start." Tom didn't ask why the man was out here alone. He just got to work. 10 minutes later, the car was humming again. "Thank you," the man said, pulling out his wallet. "Can I pay you for your time?" Tom shook his head. "Nah, just pay it forward next time you get the chance." He climbed back into his truck and drove on. But this time, the silence didn't settle quite so heavy. That night, he sat in his office again, flipping through the mail while the heater rattled in protest. Among the bills and flyers was a small white envelope with no return address. Inside was a typed letter. "To Mr. Tom Bennett, we have been informed of your consistent kindness and quiet generosity to members of your community. As someone who once benefited from such a moment of grace, I believe in returning that gift where it's due. If you are ever interested in something more, more work, more meaning, more life, please call. The number hasn't changed. Claire Maddox. Tom folded the letter slowly, sat with it for a long while. The phone was right there. Still, he didn't reach for it, not yet, but the card was no longer in his pocket. He'd placed it on the wall above his desk, right next to the photograph of Marianne and Caleb. And for the first time in years, that wall didn't feel like a memorial. It felt like a beginning. It was the kind of cold that wrapped around the bones. Not just chilly or sharp, but ancient, almost sentient, like something that wanted to remind you how small and fragile you really were. Snow drifted in lazy spirals under the amber glow of the old street lamps lining the bus stop near the edge of town. Tom's truck rumbled slowly down the hill, headlights sweeping across quiet storefronts and shuttered windows. Most of Willow Creek had long since gone to bed, their houses wrapped in fleece and Christmas lights, fireplaces whispering behind frosted panes. He hadn't meant to take the long way home, but the heater in the truck was finally warm, and his thoughts were too loud in the silence of his trailer. So he drove, past the gas station, past the diner, past the bench near the old bus stop that hadn't seen a route in 3 years, and then he saw her, a shadow, huddled and still. Small figure, curled in on itself like a question mark, legs drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around her body in a grip that said she didn't trust the night, or maybe didn't trust herself in it. Tom slowed the truck without really thinking. His instincts kicked in before his brain caught up. She didn't move as he pulled up beside her. He rolled the window down, warm air spilling into the cold night. "Ma'am," he said, voice careful. "Are you all right?" She looked up, and the sight of her eyes nearly took the wind out of him, not because she was beautiful, though she might have been once, before the cold and exhaustion etched lines across her skin, but because there was something in those eyes he recognized, not fear, not panic, but distance. She was somewhere far away, and Tom knew that place. "Do you need help?" he asked, gentler now. She didn't speak, just nodded once, a fragile movement. Tom reached across the cab and pushed open the passenger door. "Come on in. Truck's not much, but the heater works." She hesitated, looked at him like she wasn't sure what to believe. Then slowly she stood, knees stiff, fingers trembling, and climbed in. He passed her the thermos of coffee he kept in the cup holder. It wasn't fresh, but it was warm. She took it with both hands, like it might vanish if she let go. "Thank you," she whispered. That was all. She didn't tell him her name, didn't explain why she was out there or where she was going. Tom didn't ask. He'd learned over the years that not all kindness needed a reason. Sometimes people just needed a place to be without having to explain themselves. She sipped the coffee slowly, letting the heat crawl back into her bones. Tom turned the heater up another notch and adjusted the vents so they blew directly toward her. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was just honest. After a while, she leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes. Tom pulled the truck into the lot beside his shop, left the engine running, and got out. Inside, he grabbed the old army blanket from the cot and returned to the truck. She stirred slightly when he opened the door. Her eyes fluttered open. "Here," he said, holding the blanket out. "This'll help." She looked at it like it was too much, like even a gesture that small had weight, but she took it, wrapped it around herself tightly, and nodded. "Thank you again." Tom just gave a small smile and said, "Try to get some rest. You're safe. Here." He left the truck running, heater purring steadily, and walked back into the shop. The wind picked up, rattling the aluminum siding. The radio inside the office was playing an old tune he hadn't heard in years. Sam Cooke, maybe. Something about change coming. He sank into his chair, arms aching from the cold, but heart strangely warm. The woman's face lingered in his mind. Her hollow cheeks, her cracked lips, the way she held the thermos like it was the last real thing she had. Who was she? What had brought her here, to this half-dead town, to that abandoned bench? Tom didn't need to know, but something in him wanted to, not out of curiosity, but out of something gentler, something like the faint stirring of hope. He looked again at the photo of Marianne and Caleb on the desk. She would have invited the woman inside, probably made a pot of soup and offered her the good blanket, the one they only used for guests. He could almost hear her voice in his mind. "You don't have to fix everything, Tom. Just be someone people can rest next to." That was who he used to be. That was who Marianne had helped him become. And somewhere along the way, after she passed, after Caleb moved away, after the world got colder, he'd stopped being that man. He'd retreated into silence, let the weight of grief turn him into a shadow of himself. But tonight something shifted, a hinge in his heart, creaking open just a little. Maybe it was the woman. Maybe it was the way she didn't ask for help, but accepted it anyway. Or maybe, just maybe, it was time. Tom turned off the radio and stood, moving quietly to the cot in the corner. He lay down without bothering to undress, the flannel blanket pulled up to his chin. The wind howled outside. Snow tapped at the window panes like a child wanting to be let in, but inside the heater hummed. The woman slept, and the shop held its quiet vigil. And for the first time in a long while, Tom felt like he'd done something right, something that mattered. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew this. Tonight someone would be warm, and that somehow made the cold a little more bearable. Tom awoke just before dawn, his eyes blinking open to the soft golden halo of his desk lamp still glowing from the night before. His back ached from the cot's thin mattress, and his knees protested as he sat up and swung his legs to the floor. Outside, the world was still. Snow dusted the windowsill in fine patterns, and frost traced delicate feathers along the glass. A quiet morning, the kind that came only after the cold had finished its argument with the night. Tom reached for his coat, shrugged it on, and moved stiffly toward the front of the shop. The truck was still parked outside, its engine long cooled. He squinted through the glass door. Empty. She was gone. He pulled the door open and stepped out into the cold, boots crunching lightly over the snow-packed ground. The truck's cab was closed, the passenger seat vacant. The army blanket, neatly folded, lay where she'd sat, tucked carefully into the corner of the seat like she hadn't wanted to disturb anything. The thermos he'd given her sat beside it, empty but clean. He stared at the scene for a long moment, processing her absence. No goodbye, no knock on the door, just a quiet departure, like a ghost slipping through a wall. But there, just above the glove compartment, caught under the edge of the cracked dashboard, was something new, a card, cream-colored, heavy stock, no design. He pulled it out slowly, heart giving a single, unexpected thump. On the inside, written in elegant, slightly slanted handwriting, "Thank you for your kindness. My name is Claire Maddox. If you ever find yourself in need, call me. I won't forget this." Below the message was a phone number. Tom stood frozen, the card resting in his gloved hand, breath fogging the air around him. Claire Maddox. The name rolled around in his mind, stirring something. He walked back into the shop, card still in hand, and sat down heavily at his desk. He read the note again, then once more. There was something about that name. It tugged at him, familiar but distant, like a song he'd heard in another life. He reached into the bottom drawer of the desk, pulled out an old laptop he hadn't used in months, and plugged it in. The boot-up process was slow, the fan wheezing, like an asthmatic squirrel. But eventually the screen lit up. Tom opened the internet browser and typed the name into the search bar. Claire Maddox. Dozens of results filled the screen. Articles, photos, interviews. A headline from a business journal. From homeless to CEO. Claire Maddox and the bakery empire. Built on second chances. Another. Maddox Foundation funds $10 million for women's shelters nationwide. His eyes scanned the page, catching fragments. Orphaned at 14, lived on the streets, started baking out of church basements, sold her first business for $12 million, turned to philanthropy. Focused on small towns, vocational programs, women's support services. Tom leaned back in his chair, the card still resting in his palm. The woman who'd spent the night in his truck wasn't just someone down on her luck. She was someone who had been down and climbed her way up, and yet, last night, she had looked like someone with nowhere left to go. He stared out the window for a while, lost in thought. The silence of the shop felt different this morning, charged somehow, as if something had shifted in the wiring of his life, and he hadn't noticed it until just now. He thought about calling, just to say, "What? Thanks for the card," or maybe, "Are you okay?" But the truth sat heavy in his chest. Tom hadn't talked to someone outside this town for more than 5 minutes in years. He didn't do phone calls, or business meetings, or people who wore designer coats and had articles written about them. He was just a mechanic. A decent one, sure, but plain. Nothing about his life was impressive. He looked down at the calloused hands that had once built a treehouse for Caleb, rebuilt 3 engines in 1 weekend, and held Marianne's hand as she slipped away. He wasn't sure what a woman like Claire Maddox could possibly want from a man like him, besides a warm truck and a quiet night. Still, she'd left the card. He placed it carefully on the wall above his desk, next to a photo of Marianne and a faded Best of Willow Creek auto repair certificate from 2009. It didn't feel out of place there. He didn't call her that day, but he thought about her. And that night, as the snow began to fall again, Tom kept the porch light on outside the shop, just in case someone else needed a place to get warm, because for the first time in a long while, something inside him had warmed too. It wasn't love. Not yet. It wasn't even hope. It was something simpler, something more urgent. Awareness, the sense that he had unknowingly stepped into the first few pages of a new chapter, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for a man like him to be part of someone else's story again. Tom had never believed in symbols. He wasn't the kind of man who read into things. He dealt in timing chains, gaskets and carburetors. He believed in worn metal and engine oil, not fate or messages left behind like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. But the card, that cream-colored thick stock card, it sat on the corkboard above his desk like it belonged there. He'd tacked it up beside a faded photograph of Caleb and a small prayer card from Marianne's memorial service. At first it had felt out of place, like it didn't belong among those dusty remnants of his private life. But now, a few days later, Tom found his eyes drifting to it every time the shop fell silent. Claire Maddox. He'd memorized the name. The gentle curve of the script, the steadiness of the pen. The fact that she hadn't left behind an explanation, only an invitation. If you ever find yourself in need. What did that even mean? Need what? A favor? A second chance? A miracle? He hadn't told anyone about her, not that there was anyone to tell. His circle had shrunk so much in the past 5 years that he could count his weekly interactions on one hand, customers mostly, a few neighbors, and once a month Caleb's short, polite phone call. But he had told someone. Sort of. 2 days after she left, Mrs. Della Pickens brought in her old Chrysler for a new alternator. She was half-blind and wholly stubborn, always showing up without an appointment and always insisting on paying in cash. Exact change, no more, no less. As Tom worked under the hood, she stood by the heater with her mittens still on, chatting, as though silence were a crime. Snow's been bad this year. Lot of folks ending up places they didn't mean to, she said, sipping from a styrofoam cup she'd brought herself. Saw a young woman walking near the gas station night before. Last, didn't look like she had anywhere to be. Breaks your heart, don't it? Tom tightened a bolt, then paused. Yeah, it does. You give her a ride? Tom wiped his hands on a rag, eyes fixed on the engine block. Something like that. Della narrowed her eyes, then smiled a little. Still got that soft streak, huh? He gave a half smile. Some habits die harder than others. She didn't ask more. Just patted his arm and left him with an extra muffin she accidentally brought. But even after she drove off, Tom couldn't shake the feeling. It wasn't just that Claire had vanished without a trace. It was how right it had felt to open that truck door. How natural the silence between them had been. How in her brief presence he had remembered what it felt like to be useful in a way that didn't involve lug wrenches or timing belts. And now, this card. He picked it up again that night, sitting in the trailer after locking up the shop. The number was still there, clear as day. No area code he recognized, but that didn't mean much. Tom hadn't left the state in over a decade. He held his phone in his hand for a long time. His thumb hovered over the keypad. Then he set it down. Maybe. Tomorrow. Instead, he pulled out his ledger book and added a new line under Thursday. Truck heater repair, no charge. It was the smallest way he could mark what had happened. But there was something else. A shift, like someone had nudged the foundation of the quiet world he'd carefully built. The next morning, Tom showed up to the shop early. He made a full pot of coffee, even though he usually only brewed a half. He swept the front walk and cleared the snow from both benches out. Front, and when he turned the sign to open, he realized he wasn't just going through the motions. He was waiting. For what? He didn't know, but he was waiting all the same. Late that afternoon, between a tire rotation and an oil change, the shop phone rang. It rarely rang anymore. Tom wiped his hands and picked it up. Willow Creek Auto, he said, automatically. A pause, then a woman's voice, crisp, professional, warm in a practiced way. Hi, is this Mr. Tom Bennett? Speaking. My name is Jenna Loring. I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Claire Maddox. Tom straightened instinctively, though no one could see him. His heart ticked a beat faster. She asked me to check in and confirm you received her note. She mentioned a brief stay, a truck, warmth on a cold night. Tom swallowed. I did, yes. She didn't have to. She wanted to. Jenna cut in gently. Ms. Maddox is particular about gratitude. She prefers it shown, not just said. Tom didn't know what to say to that, Jenna continued. She also asked me to extend an invitation. Ms. Maddox would like to meet you again, if you're open to it. She believes you may be someone she can work with. Work with? There was a small pause. Then, she'll explain better in person. Tom's mouth was dry. When? Whenever you're ready. She's in town through the end of the week. Town? Willow? Creek wasn't the kind of place people stayed in unless they had to. I'll think about it, he said, voice low. Jenna's tone was kind. Of course. Just know the offer stands. The line clicked off a moment later. Tom set the receiver down slowly. Outside the window, the snow had started again, soft flakes falling in the golden hour light, turning everything tender. He looked up at the card once more. Still no price, still no expectations, just an open door. And for the first time in years, Tom wondered what might be waiting on the other side. Tom stared at the phone on his desk like it was something foreign. Not a tool, not a line of connection, just a thing, quiet and inert. But today, it felt heavier than any wrench in his toolbox. The card still sat where he'd pinned it, unchanged. And patient. If you ever find yourself in need, call me. Her handwriting was confident, deliberate. It didn't waver like someone unsure of her offer. It extended from a place of knowing, but that was the problem. Tom didn't need anything, at least not in the way people usually meant. His shop was still running, barely. He had enough to eat. He had a place to sleep, heat in the pipes, coffee in the pot. And loneliness? Well, he'd learned to carry that like a spare tire, always present but tucked away unless needed. Besides, what would he even say? "Hi, Claire. This is the guy with the truck. Thanks for not dying of hypothermia in my passenger seat. Want to grab coffee? Maybe donate $1 million to my leaky-roofed shop while you're at it?" He exhaled and turned away from the phone. It was easier to lose himself in work. He spent most of the morning underneath a rusted-out Chevy, replacing a transmission that had no right still being on the road. Then a brake job on an old Ford sedan, followed by an oil change for the town librarian, who always paid in homemade pies. He told himself he wasn't thinking about Claire Maddox. But every time his hands went still, she was there. Her voice soft and hoarse, her hands wrapped around the thermos, her silence deeper than the cold. By the time the sun started its slow winter descent, Tom had walked past the phone 11 times. He so counted. He made another pot of coffee just to have something to do. He even restocked the candy bowl at the front desk, something he hadn't done since Halloween 3 years ago, and still, the phone didn't ring. Near dusk, he sat at the counter, elbows resting on the cool surface, coffee growing cold in his hands. He reached for the card again, read it, then set it back down. He picked up the phone, then put it down, picked it up. Again, put it down. A man could go crazy like this. What if he called and it changed everything? Worse, what if he called and it didn't? He rubbed his temples and muttered, "You're talking to a piece of paper, Tom. That's not a good sign." He stood, stretched, and turned off the heater in the office. The cold crept in immediately, making his joints ache, but it cleared his head. Then he did something he hadn't done in months. He reached for his jacket, locked the front door behind him, and walked. The streets were mostly empty, snow piled up in soft ridges along the sidewalks. Porch lights flickered on one by one, glowing, like fireflies in the blue dusk. He passed the post office, the bakery, the hardware store with the bell that hadn't worked since spring, and then he saw the bench, the same bench where she had sat just nights before, shivering under the weight. Of the sky, it was empty now, just snow and silence. He walked over to it, stood for a moment, then sat. It was stupid, he knew. He wasn't sure what he expected to feel, some lightning bolt of certainty maybe, some inner voice that said, "Call her, you fool, this means something." But the truth was quieter than that. All he felt was a strange sense of presence, like her absence had somehow left a warmth behind. And for a man like Tom, who had lived so long in the shadow of what was gone, that warmth was worth listening to. He sat there for a long time, hands in his coat pockets, watching his breath rise and vanish. Then he stood up, turned, and walked back toward the shop. Inside, he didn't hesitate. He picked up the phone, dialed the number 1 ring 23. He was about to hang up when a voice answered. "Hello?" It was her, Claire, not her assistant. Not some smooth-talking gatekeeper, just her. Tom froze for a heartbeat, then found his voice. "Hey, it's Tom. From the truck. The one who offered you bad coffee and a noisy heater." A soft laugh on the other end. "Tom, I was hoping you'd call." He didn't know what to say to that. "I wasn't sure I should. I left the card for a reason." Another pause. Then Tom asked the question that had been sitting on his chest for days. "Why me?" Claire's voice was steady. "Because you didn't ask me who I was, or why I was there. You didn't try to fix me. You just made space." Tom exhaled, slowly. "That's not much." "It was everything," she said, "and I think you're the kind of man who's done that for a long time, probably for people who didn't even notice. I want to talk to you, in person." Tom hesitated. "I'm no one special." "That's the thing," she replied, voice soft. "You are. You just forgot." There was a long, quiet beat between them. Not awkward, just honest. Then Claire added, "I'm still in town. There's a diner near Main Street. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock? Tom nodded, though she couldn't see. They'll be there. She didn't say goodbye, just, I'm glad you called, and the line went silent. Tom stood for a long time, phone still in hand. Then he looked at the card one last time. It didn't glow, didn't whisper secrets. But it didn't have to, because now, finally, it had done what it came to do. It had gotten him to say yes. The diner was the kind of place that hadn't changed its wallpaper since the mid-80s. Faded floral print curled slightly at the corners, and the cracked vinyl booths smelled faintly of maple syrup and thyme. The open sign blinked half-lit in the window, and a tiny bell above the door let out a lazy ting when Tom stepped inside. It was just after 8. Snow clung to his boots. He'd dressed carefully, clean jeans, a flannel shirt that didn't have oil stains, his good coat. It wasn't fancy, but it was presentable, and that was enough. Tom scanned the room. She was already there. Claire sat in the far booth, a mug cupped in both hands, steam curling around her face like a veil. She looked better, rested. Her cheeks had more color, her posture straighter, but her eyes, that quiet stillness behind them, were exactly as he remembered. She spotted him and gave a small wave, more invitation than greeting. Tom crossed the room, his boots thudding softly against the linoleum. "Morning," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Hi, Tom." He nodded toward the mug. "That your first?" "My second." "I was nervous," she said with a small, almost embarrassed smile. "Didn't want to look like I was hiding behind the coffee." "I usually do," he said, then added, "Hide behind mine, I mean." That got a laugh. It was light, genuine, not rehearsed. They sat in a comfortable silence for a few moments. Then Claire spoke. "I guess I owe you a few answers." Tom shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." She looked down, then back at him. "I know, but I want to tell you anyway." He nodded once. He was here to listen. Claire leaned back slightly, as if settling into a version of herself she didn't wear often. "I used to be invisible," she began. "Years ago. I was homeless for nearly 2 years. Fell through every crack in the system. Lost both my parents before I turned 20, a boyfriend who left me in a motel room with $62 and a shut-off phone." Tom didn't interrupt. "I got a job at a diner, one like this, washing dishes. The cook there let me sleep in the pantry during a blizzard. First time I felt safe in months. I stayed 6 weeks, started baking things to sell. Cinnamon rolls mostly. That turned into something more." He nodded slowly. "The Maddox Bakery." Claire looked surprised. "You read about it?" "After you left the card. I looked you up." She smiled faintly. "I never used to Google myself, too afraid it'd remind me how much of it I still didn't believe." There was something raw behind her composure, like she wasn't quite sure whether telling this story would set her free or unravel her entirely. "I sold the business 5 years ago. Made more money than I knew what to do with. Didn't feel like I'd earned it. So I started a foundation to help people like me. People who fall through cracks. People who just need one warm night in a truck to believe the world hasn't forgotten them." She stopped, eyes searching his. "That's why I came back, why I looked you up. That night, you reminded me of what saved me in the first place. Not money, not business, just someone who didn't ask questions, who let me breathe." Tom was quiet for a long time. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he wanted to say it right. "You looked like someone who'd forgotten how to be looked at," he said finally. "I didn't want to make that worse." Claire blinked, caught off guard by the honesty. "I didn't expect a card," he continued. "Didn't expect anything. I just didn't want to leave you in the cold." "You didn't," she said softly. "Not just literally." The waitress came by, refilled their coffees, dropped off 2 menus, and disappeared like she'd done this 1,000 times. Claire flipped hers open but didn't look at it. "There's something else," she said after a moment. "Something I haven't told anyone outside my circle in a long time." Tom set his coffee down. "You don't have to." I want to, she said, because if I don't say it to someone who gets it, I think I'll lose the courage to say it at all. She inhaled slowly, then said it like it was a confession. I left everything 2 weeks ago. The board, the foundation, the meetings. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just walked away. I didn't want to be anyone's CEO. I wanted to remember who I was before the press releases and the speeches. Tom didn't move. I didn't expect to end up on that bench, she went on. I didn't plan it. I was just driving and kept driving until I ran out of gas and pride. Then the snow came, and I sat down. I figured maybe I'd sit there until the cold told me what to do. She looked at him now, eyes shining, not with tears, but clarity. And then you stopped, Tom swallowed. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. I always stop. Doesn't matter who it is. Never has. I know, she said. That's why I came back. They didn't speak for a while after that. The moment didn't need anything more. Eventually Tom picked up the menu, glanced at it and said, "You ever had the pecan waffles here? They're not great, but they're dependable." Claire smiled. "I think I could use a little dependable." He looked across the booth at this woman with 2 lives, one full of headlines and fortune, the other buried beneath blankets in a quiet truck cab, and saw her for what she truly was. Not a stranger, not a millionaire, just someone who needed a place to rest for a while. And maybe so did he. The shop smelled like winter again, rubber, oil, and the faint burn of the old space heater working overtime in the corner. Tom wiped his hands on a rag, then on his jeans, then back on the rag, as if nervous energy could be scrubbed away with grease. Claire was coming. He wasn't sure what to call it. A visit, a meeting. That word felt too formal for the woman who'd once curled up in his truck with a borrowed blanket and coffee gone cold. But it also felt too casual for the woman who had a Wikipedia page, a private foundation, and a voice that made you believe in second chances. It had been 3 days since they sat in that diner. 3 days since pecan waffles and honest words. 3 days since Claire said, before she left the table, "I'd like to see where you spend your days." Tom, so here he was, swept the shop floor twice, cleared the parts shelf, even fixed the closed sign that had been crooked since spring. At exactly 9 a.m., a car pulled up, not a black SUV or a chauffeured ride. Just a silver Honda with a little rust near the wheel well and snow melting in wet streaks down the side. Claire stepped out wearing a navy coat and a knit scarf that looked handmade. Her hair was tied back this time, face bare of makeup, the same quiet strength in her stride. Tom opened the door before she reached it. "Morning." "Morning," she said, eyes soft. "Smells like work in here." That's one way to put it. He stepped aside. "Come on in." She entered slowly, eyes scanning the space, the cracked tiles near the counter, the walls lined with tools hung by nails hammered in decades ago. The calendar still turned to November. "It's exactly what I imagined," she said. "Most people imagine something more modern," Tom replied. Claire smiled. "I've had modern. I like honest better." He gestured to the stool near the counter. She sat, fingers curling around a fresh mug of coffee he'd brewed just 15 minutes earlier. He leaned on the workbench across from her, arms folded. "So, you said you wanted to see where I spend my days?" "I did, and I meant it." Tom studied her, unsure whether to ask the next question, but he asked anyway. "Why?" Claire set the mug down. "Because I'm rebuilding something." He raised an eyebrow. "A bakery?" "No. Myself." She met his gaze. "I lost the thread, Tom. Somewhere between board meetings and press interviews, I became the version of me that people wanted to see. I forgot the girl who used to cry over burnt muffins and wash dishes for rent. I came back here because that girl never would have walked past someone freezing on a bench, but I almost did, if you hadn't stopped me." Tom nodded slowly, letting that settle. "You didn't seem like someone who needed saving." "That's the trouble with people like me," she said softly. "We get good at hiding it." They were quiet for a moment. The only sound was the soft tick of the heater behind them. Then Claire spoke again. I want to do something here, not for headlines or speeches, just something real. With you. Tom blinked. With me? I've been thinking, she said, straightening a little. Your shop isn't just a garage. It could be more. A place to train people. Mentor young folks who don't have direction. Teach them what it means to build something with their own hands. Tom didn't answer right away. Claire continued, her voice steady but gentle. I can fund it, quietly. No plaques, no cameras. Just the two of us doing something that matters. You don't owe me anything, he said quietly. I know. She smiled. That's why I want to. Tom looked down at his hands, worn, lined, chipped nails and oil stains that never came off. Then he looked around the shop, the place Marianne once called his second skin, the place where Caleb learned how to rotate tires, where he buried his grief in engines and socket wrenches. He thought of the silence that used to greet him every morning, and how lately it wasn't so loud. I wouldn't know where to start, he said honestly. That's okay, she replied. I do. He looked up. You'd really want to build something like that here? In Willow Creek? Claire shrugged, a wry smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Well, there's already a stubborn, good-hearted mechanic in place. Seems like a solid foundation. Tom chuckled, a low, surprised sound. You don't scare easy, do you? Not anymore. He stepped away from the workbench, walked over to the corkboard behind his desk, and looked at the card again. The one with no logo, no title, no promises, just that quiet offer. He took it down, turned it over in his hands, and then looked at Claire. What do we call it? He asked. Claire tilted her head. The shop? No, Tom said slowly. The thing we build next? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the Warm Truck Foundation. Tom blinked, laughed, shook his head. That's a terrible name, he said. Claire laughed, and it filled the shop like sunlight breaking through snow clouds. Okay, she said. Then you name it. He thought about it. Not long. Just enough. How? About Second Start Garage? Claire nodded. That's perfect. He set the card down on the desk, this time not as a mystery, but as a beginning. She rose from the stool, took one last sip of coffee, and extended her hand. Partners? She asked. Tom looked at it, then past it, then into the eyes of a woman who had once disappeared into his truck and come back as someone who changed the temperature of his world. He shook her hand. Partners. And just like that, the silence in the shop wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with possibility. Tom didn't sleep much the night after they shook hands. He lay on the cot in the corner of his office, blanket pulled to his chin, staring at the cracked ceiling tiles as if they held answers he'd never dared to ask for. Outside, the wind rattled. The windows, and somewhere nearby, snowmelt dripped into the gutter with slow, persistent rhythm. But inside, the storm was all in his chest. He kept hearing her voice. Partners. It had sounded so simple, so clean. Like something two people say when they're starting a company, not when they're stepping into something that could change their lives. She'd meant it. That much he knew. Claire wasn't the kind of woman to say things just to fill the air. Every word she spoke felt deliberate, weighted, like she had made peace with every syllable before she let it go. But Tom wasn't used to being part of anything anymore. The thought of kids walking through his shop, eager, wide-eyed, watching him as if he knew something valuable, it scared the hell out of him. He didn't feel like a mentor. He felt like a man who kept things running, a man who survived, but didn't build anymore. At some point in the quiet hours, he sat up, pulled on his coat and walked out into the snow. The cold hit his skin like truth, sharp and real. He didn't mind. He crossed the lot, past the truck where Claire had once slept, and stood under the old security light, staring at the snow-covered sign that read, Bennett Auto Repair. It looked tired, worn, a little like him, By morning, he'd already made the coffee and cleared a space in the back of the shop, dusting off a metal shelf that hadn't held anything but cobwebs in 3 years. He wasn't sure what he was doing, just moving, one small motion at a time. At 9:10, Claire arrived. This time, she wore jeans, boots, and a dark sweater beneath a light grey coat. No makeup, no armor. She looked like someone who wasn't pretending anymore. She brought blueprints, not formal architectural plans, just sketches on thick paper, drawn in neat looping lines with notes scribbled in the margins. Mock-ups, she said, laying them out on his counter like a dealer showing cards. Just ideas. This one's a training space. We could knock out the back wall and open it into a separate bay. Add tool storage here, break room over there. Tom hovered over the drawings, eyebrows knit together. You drew these? Claire nodded. Used to love drafting as a kid. Architecture was my first dream. Baking was my survival. He said nothing, but she noticed the hesitation in his eyes. She folded the sketches slowly. Tom, say what you're thinking. He took a breath. I'm thinking I don't belong in a blueprint. I belong in the in-between, fixing things, not building futures. These plans, you've thought them out. They're real. I'm just a guy who changes brake pads and keeps coffee hot. You're more than that, am I? He met her eyes. You've built empires. I've patched together a life with duct tape and routine. How does someone like you see someone like me and think, yes, him, that's the man I'll trust to change lives? She didn't flinch. Because I know what it's like to stand in the cold and feel seen, she said softly. Because you didn't ask for anything and you still gave. Because some people shine, Tom. And some people hold the light steady so others can find their way home. He looked away. I'm not shiny, Claire. I'm not asking you to be. He pressed his lips together, walked to the window. Snowflakes tapped at the glass like reminders. I lost someone, he said quietly. Marianne, my wife, 4 years ago. Cancer. Claire's eyes softened. She made me believe I was worth something, he said, voice low. That I was more than grease under my nails and calluses on my palms. When she died, I stopped trying, just kept the lights on, took care of the truck, let the world get smaller. He turned back to her. I don't know how to be that man again. You don't have to, she replied. You only have to be the one you are now. That's the man who opened his truck to a stranger. That's the man I trust. For a moment, the shop felt like church. Quiet, honest, holy in a way that had nothing to do with walls or sermons. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder. I drafted a budget. Quiet funding, no strings. We start small. 6 months, pilot program. A handful of kids, paid stipends, tools provided. You lead the training. I'll handle the logistics. We evaluate from there. Tom took the folder, thumbed through the pages. Numbers, schedules, real steps. This wasn't a dream, it was happening. If he said yes, and for the first time since Marianne's funeral, he felt something push back against the weight he'd carried for so long. Not a replacement, not a miracle, just movement. 6 months, he said. Claire nodded. He closed the folder, set it on the counter. Okay, she blinked. Okay? Yeah. He let out a breath. Let's build something. A smile spread across her face, one that came from the center of her chest. Not the press release kind, the kind built from hard days and harder choices. I'll get started on the grant paperwork, she said. Tom smirked. I'll sweep out the back bay. Claire gathered her things, paused at the door. Tom? Yeah? She looked at him softer now. You're more than worth it. You're needed. Then she left, and for the first time in years, Tom Bennett stood in the middle of his shop and believed it might be true. It started with a single workbench, cleared of clutter for the first time in years. Then came the tools, labeled and hung in neat rows, wrenches, socket sets, ratchets, each in its place. A new heater replaced the old one that coughed like a lifelong smoker, and the cracked window in the back bay was finally swapped for one that sealed shut when it snowed. Tom had always fixed things, But he hadn't rebuilt anything in a long, long time until now. It had been 3 weeks since he said yes. 3 weeks since Claire walked out of his shop and left behind not just a folder of plans, but a future. They spoke daily now, sometimes about logistics, sometimes about nothing in particular. She sent updates on grant approvals, zoning forms, the arrival schedule for new tools. He sent her photos of the progress, a freshly painted wall, a cleaned-out storage room, a handwritten welcome sign tacked to the office door. Most evenings, he found himself staying later, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The silence in the shop no longer felt like an echo chamber for grief. It felt like anticipation, a waiting space, a becoming. The new program would launch in January. Claire had already reached out to a local youth shelter in the neighboring county, and 4 young adults had signed on. 2 boys, 2 girls, all between 16 and 20. They would learn basic automotive skills, get their hands dirty, and if Tom had anything to say about it, walk away feeling like they could fix more than just a car. He was nervous, but it was a good kind of nervous. The kind that meant something, mattered again. On Christmas Eve, Tom found himself stringing a modest row of lights along the awning of the garage. They flickered a bit, and he had to jiggle the extension cord to keep them on, but they held. From the street, the glow looked warm, like a promise. Claire arrived just before dusk, her coat dusted with snow, cheeks pink from the cold. She carried a box wrapped in butcher paper, tied with a piece of twine. "You brought something?" Tom asked as he opened the door for her. "Maybe." She handed him the box. "But you have to open it inside." He raised an eyebrow, amused, and led her into the shop. The heater hummed gently in the background, and the tree in the corner, small and slightly lopsided, glowed with dollar store ornaments and 2 carefully placed candy canes. Tom set the box on the counter and untied the twine. Inside was a framed photo of the truck. His truck. The shot was taken at dawn, snow still clinging to the windshield, steam curling from the exhaust. And in the passenger seat, just barely visible through the foggy glass, was the shadow of a woman wrapped in a blanket, holding a thermos with both hands. It was that night, their night, Claire spoke softly. "I took that picture the next morning, just before I left. I didn't even realize I still had it on my phone until last week." Tom didn't know what to say. He traced the frame with his fingers. "I thought maybe it should live here," she added, "so neither of us forgets where this really started." He nodded slowly. "It'll hang next to the card." She smiled. "Good." They stood there a moment longer. Then Tom asked, "Are you staying in town tonight?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. "I rented a small cottage on the North Ridge, quiet, full of drafty windows, and smells like pine. I like it." "You're welcome to stay for dinner," Tom said before he could second-guess himself. "I was just going to heat up some stew and maybe burn a frozen pie." Her grin was immediate, disarming. "That sounds perfect." They ate in the office, paper plates balanced on knees, the space heater humming, and the Christmas lights blinking in mismatched rhythm. Afterward, Tom made cocoa on the hot plate, and Claire wandered the shop, hands trailing along tool benches and newly cleaned cabinets. "You ever think," she asked quietly, "about what might have happened if you hadn't stopped that night?" Tom leaned against the counter, mug in hand. "I try not to." "I do," she said. "Sometimes I think the person I was becoming wouldn't have survived much longer. Not because I didn't have resources or people or therapy, but because I'd forgotten how to feel safe around someone real." He didn't answer, just sipped his cocoa and let the silence hold the weight of her words. "I've done a lot of good," she continued. "Built things, helped people, gave away more than I ever expected to earn. But I think this is the first thing I've done that feels like it gives back to something that gave to me." Tom looked at her. "You're The one changing lives now? Claire shook her head gently. No, we are. Later, when she stood at the door to leave, snow beginning to fall again in the blue hush of evening, she turned to him and said, I think we both needed a warm truck that night. He nodded. And a second chance. She touched his arm gently. Merry Christmas, Tom. He watched her walk to her car, headlights cutting through the flurries, and then disappear into the falling quiet. New Year's came with the smell of motor oil and fresh paint. The first trainee arrived 2 days early, an 18-year-old named Jonah, with quiet eyes and a nervous laugh. Tom showed him where the gloves were, how to check the oil, how to feel the difference between a worn belt and a new one. More would come. The program would grow. Claire visited often, but not as a guest. She helped with paperwork, painted the entryway herself, and brought soup on cold days. Their rhythm became easy, familiar, sometimes quiet, sometimes filled with stories, but always warm, always real. One evening, just before locking up, Tom flipped the new sign that hung by the door. Second Start Garage. Eston. 2024, he stepped back, looked at the frame on the wall, the photo of the truck, the card, and now a small plaque that Claire had mounted beneath them. Kindness costs nothing, but it changes everything. As he turned off the lights, he left one on above the front door, not because he forgot, but because someone might need to see it. Someone might still be walking, and this place was built for second starts. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. It always warms our hearts to see how far these stories travel. If this story touched you in any way, if it made you think, feel, or even just pause for a quiet moment, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more heartfelt stories waiting for you right here. And from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending your time with us today. We know your time is valuable, and it means so much that you chose to spend part of it here. Until next time, take care and keep believing in kindness.